It's a bad sign when two opposing sides that can't agree on anything agree that war is coming. Is that the state between the West and NATO? Is everyone saying conflict is now inevitable? Well, at least two intelligence reports seem to be saying the same thing, even though they come from opposite sides of the war. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about that, plus a real lifeline being extended to Ukraine. All right, let's get into it. So the first story I wanted to quick hit on is a good news story, because everybody loves good news. And that is that Ukraine has received $2.2 billion, a lifeline, so to speak, from Canada. I don't know if it's the Republic of Canada. And this is significant because it sounds like the United States may actually get its act together. Speaker Johnson has pivoted his language from talking about if Ukraine aid is passed, or, oh, maybe we'll pass Ukraine aid. Now it's more when. He says, oh, well, once we avert the government shutdown, then we're going to pass some Ukraine aid. Then we're going to find a way to make things happen. And so it's really interesting to see that narrative shift. And generally, what you see when legislation like this gets passed is that key leadership has to talk about passing it first. They are going to indicate whether or not this is going to happen, since they're the real power brokers in Congress. And so once their perspective shifts, they have the ability to remove other roadblocks that might have been holding up, or have the ability to coerce or deal make with holdout representatives. And that sounds like the direction things are heading. Now, the nice thing is that because it's a couple weeks away, right? Canada, by giving Ukraine $2 billion, has given the Ukrainians an additional, I did the math actually, an additional roughly 1 month. It's a little less than 1 month, based on kind of my napkin math, right? This is using the statements by the CIA director, who said $60 billion aid package will allow Ukraine to fight for about 18 additional months. So by that math, a $2.2 billion aid package would allow them to sustain it for maybe another 3.5, 4 weeks. Not bad by any means. And certainly, even though it takes a long time to convert this money into weapons, Ukraine, knowing that there's funding down the line, it's like a car, right? It knows if you know a gas station is just a couple miles away that you can fuel up, you can drive a little harder in the meanwhile. Now, let's talk about the seeming reports that conflict between Russia and NATO might actually be a lot closer than anyone thinks or anyone thought. But of course, before I do, real quick, guys, if you want access to some of the exclusive combat footage coming out of the front lines, as for example, the fighting in Orlivka, where Ukraine has stopped the Russian forces, you're going to want to become a member of combatvetnews.com. You guys probably know it's hard to get sponsors. YouTube still demonetizing my videos like almost constantly. If I show basically anyone with a weapon, anyone with a military piece of equipment, I get demonetized. I feel like it's an election year, and that's part of why. And so I depend on you guys to support me and enable me to continue to do this. So thanks to all the members of combatvetnews.com. And, today we're dropping another round of exclusive combat footage, or exclusive videos of viral combat footage that is coming to us. Some of it is just a few hours old when we review it. So definitely check it out. Become a member at combatvetnews.com. Okay. So here is what I thought was troubling. First off, that according to the Institute for the Study of War, several Russian financial, economic, and military indicators suggest that Russia is preparing for a large-scale conventional conflict with NATO, not imminently, but on a shorter timeline than what some Western analysts posited, right? And, there's the evidence for this is a little sparse, right? Putin has hardened his narratives, and he certainly aspires to conquer more territory. But the fact is that a lot of the analysis, right, for this is actually coming from German intelligence, right? And the Polish intelligence services also seem to be in agreement with Polish President Duda saying in a March 20th interview that Putin is intensifying his efforts to shift Russia into a war economy. And ultimately, his intention is to attack NATO as early as 2026 or 2027, citing unspecified German research, which I think is code for German intelligence, who's quite good, right? And of course, the Danish defense minister saying the same thing, that intelligence indicates Russia may attempt to attack a NATO country in 3 to 5 years. And why would Russia want to do this? Well, it actually makes a lot of sense. For example, we've talked extensively on this channel about how Europe's atrophied industrial base is unable to produce weapon systems organically, meaning that if they don't have the United States military backing them up, Europe itself almost every country has tiny militaries with limited capacities to backfill them. And Russia, as we've talked about, has had its professional military decimated in this conflict, right? 87% of the Russians that went into Ukraine have been killed. The problem is that the Russian military has evolved. Think of it like a little bit of a forced evolution. And the Ukrainian military has too, right? Where they've become experts at drones, experts at this sort of trench-based armored warfare, right? Drone warfare, artillery. They've evolved into this new military that conventional Western forces are kind of scratching their heads against, right? Now, don't get me wrong. The Russian military has achieved what battlefield victories it has at a human cost that is astounding. But that's also, for Putin, confidence inspiring, right? He believes that because in the West, if we were to take 30,000 casualties, the countries would capitulate. Right? And he might be right. Voters in France might not want to see 30,000 French body bags, right? Even if it meant defending France itself. And when you combine that with the fact that Russia believes it might be able to install a more isolationist administration in the United States that's less likely to want to help NATO allies, well, Putin may actually think that he has a small window in which he can actually invade, right? He believes if he can defeat Ukraine, right, that the Europeans still won't be able to produce enough artillery shells and combat equipment or even have enough trained soldiers to resist this Russian army that it can just roll past Ukraine and just keep on rolling. I think that is the Russian plan here, to use Ukraine as like a training ground. At least that's what this intelligence assessment is saying, right? But here's where things get even a little more fraught, honestly. And that's because Russian intelligence is saying that France is getting ready to deploy 2,000 troops to Ukraine. Russia's saying, France, you are also like marching towards direct conflict. Right now, this is from TASS, the Russian state news agency, who has a limited relationship with the truth at best. And this is the director of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, says that he has data to which France is already preparing a military contingent to send to Ukraine. Initially, he's saying 2,000 troops for an operation. Such a large military unit cannot be transferred and stationed in Ukraine unnoticed. And he says, quote, it will become a legitimate priority target for attacks by Russian armed forces. Right? And of course, this was emphasized by pro-Russian media. And while the French themselves are like, no, this just isn't true, and I'm inclined to believe them, I think what is more significant is that Russia itself believes that NATO is ramping up and wants to escalate this conflict. And it's a little bit like when you see a random person and you say, man, I think that person is a threat. You're going to watch things and you're going to watch for signs they're a threat. And if you look hard enough, almost any innocuous motion looks like a threat. Was that person checking his wallet or reaching for a gun, right? Was that person, fixing his hair or pulling back for a punch, right? And that is sort of the danger between states, is once you start to look for signs of an escalation and a threat, you begin to see it. And of course, once you've shown a high willingness to be aggressive, and invade your neighbors, well, you know, being treated as a threat is like a reasonable response by a lot of these Western countries. But again, without a robust military and defense industrial base to combat that, it's going to be a tough fight. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you. Thank you so much to all the members of combatvetnews.com. New video drops today. Hit like, hit subscribe on the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.